few weeks ago, Valentine's Day came and went, and I hardly even noticed. But every year, I think about the pressure society has put on single people, and especially women, to not be alone for that day. So some singles will try to find someone or anyone that they can spend the evening with. And men are under pressure to find ways to express their love to their significant other by buying gifts of chocolate and jewelry and sweet little cards, while companies like Hallmark and Zales see a spike in their sales. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with giving gifts to your significant other, but a lot of couples fall into the trap, and this is out in the world, of letting society tell them how to love and who to love and when to show their love. And they don't realize how far they have gotten from Yahweh's plan for a man and a woman to be in a monogamous, lifelong relationship, and that in the Bible we have a blueprint for how that relationship should be. So today we're going to look at part of that blueprint. I've entitled this message "The Best Song of All Time" because the book we're going to cover is the self-proclaimed best song in the Bible. So I can say with some confidence that it was at least the best song at the time that it was written. Song of Solomon 1:1. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. This states that this is the Song of Songs. This is a phrase that means that the song is better than all others, similar to how you might say King of Kings. This is the best of all songs. And there's a lot of evidence that Solomon wrote this song, so saying that this is the best song means a lot, given that Solomon had written so many other songs. In 1 Kings 4:32, we see this written about Solomon. He spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Now, there is some debate over who actually wrote this and who the characters are in this book, so much that earlier this week I almost scrapped this message and started with something else, because I like to be able to present facts about the background of this book, but instead all I can do is present one common view. I will say that the Song of Solomon is definitely one of the most unique books in the Bible, and it's still one of my favorite. I would still personally rank Ecclesiastes and Proverbs maybe a little higher, but like those two books, the Song of Solomon has a lot of content that we can apply to our lives. It's just focused primarily on marriage and intimacy. Sometimes I feel like the world has a view that marriage is an intimacy killer. And this is completely backwards from what Yahweh intended. He intended for true intimacy to start with marriage. You know, the relationship after marriage changes for sure, and those married couples can confirm that. You get more settled in and more comfortable with your spouse, but hopefully that relationship keeps getting stronger each year. Problems come and you deal with them. More problems come and you deal with those. And hopefully you and your spouse get better at working through that next set of problems that's coming. The Song of Solomon seems to celebrate intimacy within marriage, but could also be helpful for singles who are looking for a spouse and give them something to strive for. And if you can get past all the metaphors and similes that may seem silly to us today, you can see a relationship that was passionate even after marriage, and even after they had dealt with some of their issues in their relationship. And I'm not going to look at every chapter in detail because we have a mixed audience today, but I would like to pique your interest in continuing your own study. I'll highlight a few points that maybe you can take home and start applying to your marriage relationship, or if you're looking for a relationship, give you an idea of how a righteous relationship should be. To start, I'd like to remind you of what Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is given by inspiration of Yahweh and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness. So we shouldn't be quick to dismiss the Song of Solomon as having no relevance in our study and growth as believers. Okay, a little bit of background. In some parts of Judaism, the Song of Solomon is read every year after the Passover Seder. In fact, Ellie reminded me that in our early days with the previous congregation, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they would often choose short books to read, and this was one of them that we would read regularly. And one reason the Jews do this is because they believe the book symbolizes the Exodus story and that it also embodies the Torah. And another reason is that the book is supposed to symbolize the love between Yahweh and Israel. And a lot of Christians today also take the book and try to apply it to the relationship between the body, us, the congregation, as the bride, and Yahshua as the groom. And it's not hard to draw correlations as you read through this. Though I do question if the whole book can be applied in this way, because there is a large amount of sensuality described in the book. We're not going to cover those details today. There are still a lot of youth here, like my kids, who have a really, really, really long time until they're going to get married. So a lot of Jews read this book every year, but on the flip side, according to Matthew Henry in his commentary, Jews in the past have suggested that this book not be read by anyone under the age of 30, if they're unmarried, because of this sensuality that's contained in here. And that's another reason this book is so divisive and has to be handled carefully, and especially from behind the pulpit. So I'll begin by introducing the characters. We have a groom. Oh, hold on. The two main characters in the book are the bride and the groom, as you can see here in this slide. Every once in a while, you'll get to hear from a group of friends or family. Some Bibles actually have this broken out into sections so that it reads kind of like a play, where you can see what each character is saying. But if you're just reading through it, like say in the Restoration Study Bible, you have to determine that yourself based on context. The groom is often thought to be Solomon, and we see references to his wealth and his social status as the bride is making comments to him. Solomon is also specifically mentioned a few times in this book. The bride, on the other hand, is a Shulamite woman, and we don't know much about her, but she probably came from a poor family. She possibly was raised without a father in her life, and I say this because he's never mentioned in the book, even though her brothers and her mother are. Some people think that the Shulamite could be Abishag, spoken of in 1 Kings 1. She's the Shulamite woman that came to comfort King David in 1 Kings 1. So she was obviously close to the family. Later on in 2 Kings 2, Solomon's older brother says, "Can I have her hand in marriage?" And Solomon pretty much freaks out, and you can read about that in 1 Kings 2. And the verse makes it sound like David's worried that his brother's trying to take over the throne, because that was a real concern. Solomon's brother was trying to take over the throne. But maybe he was also upset because there was already a special connection between him and Abishag. But that's all speculation. So outside of the bride and the groom, we also see a group of friends in the background that kind of come in every once in a while. So if you want to think about this as a song, you can think about it as a duet between a man and a woman, and a chorus of friends and family that chime in every once in a while. The timeline for the Song of Solomon is also not perfectly clear. If we assume that the groom is Solomon, this was probably written early in his reign, before he was corrupted by all of his foreign wives that he picked up. Also, the language points to a young couple at the beginning, and there are indications that the bride was also young. But as for the timeline within this relationship, here is one generally accepted view. This is a slide from Chuck Swindoll. As you can see, the beginning of Song of Solomon kind of focuses on their courtship, and there are references to a wedding ceremony that happens later on in the book. And then the rest of the book is about their maturing marriage. And one thing I want to point out here is the theme, according to Chuck Swindoll, is the joy and intimacy of love within a committed marriage relationship. And I need to point out very clearly that we can't take this book out of context of Scripture. That means the intimacy that's described in this book is between a man and a woman in a committed marriage relationship. Ephesians 5 warns us that followers of Yahweh have to put away fornication and uncleanness if we want to inherit the kingdom. And that's a message that's missing from a lot of relationship guides today. And the bride even shows in this book that she practiced abstinence before she was with the groom. Towards the end of the song, we're not going to get to it today, but we get a flashback to when she was younger. And her brothers are saying that they're going to protect her until she's spoken for. And they ask, is she a wall or is she a door? In other words, they're asking their sister, are you a wall that guards yourself until you're married, or are you someone who opens for anyone who comes knocking? And her brothers say, if she's a wall, we're going to help defend her. If she's a door, we're going to board her up and stand guard. And there's a lesson there for all the single ladies who may be ready to start a relationship. There's also a lesson there for all the brothers out there who have sisters. It's your job to help defend her honor. Okay? There are also a few places where the bride tells the daughters of Jerusalem not to awaken love before it pleases. And she's probably hinting to her friends, don't go around and try to force or hurry love like a lot of singles would today on Valentine's Day, but instead be patient. So as we look into this song, just remember that we're talking about a righteous love. Let's start in chapter 1, verse 2. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. This is the bride speaking, and she's right to the point, isn't she? And if you look at the book as a whole, you'll see that it's the bride that speaks first, right here in this verse. She speaks last, and she speaks the most. And as you go through this and take a closer look, you'll see that, like in this verse, the bride is very clear about her feelings and her desires toward the groom, and he responds favorably to this. Verse 3, because of the savor of thy good ointments, thy name is as ointment poured forth. Therefore do the virgins love thee. On the surface, it looks like the bride's complimenting how he smells. So take note, young men. Practice good hygiene, smell nice for your lady. Ask her what she likes. By the way, in chapter 4, he actually returns that compliment right back to her. But she also mentions here that his name is as ointment poured forth. In other words, that he has a worthy character, his name. And for the ladies who are entering into relationships, you should ask yourself the same thing. How is his character? Skipping down to verse 5, the bride tells us a little more about herself. I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I'm black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. So she was out in the sun tending to the vineyards all the time. And in this culture, having really dark skin, compared to the average person in that region, was a sign that you had to work outside doing menial tasks and were less affluent. Having lighter skin was a sign of wealth and was probably a standard of beauty at that time. So she's saying here, I'm sorry that I don't meet society's standard of beauty and wealth. And today, more than ever, out in the world, we're given standards of beauty. You don't have to look hard to figure out what those are because they're shoved in our face. So here's a question for married men to think about. Have you ever heard your wife compare herself to the standard of beauty in the world today and then feel like she doesn't measure up? We can drop down to verse 9 and see how the groom responds to this. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels, thy neck with chains of gold. We will make thee borders of gold with studs of silver. The groom is saying, don't worry about how you look or how much wealth you have. I'll take care of you and make sure you're provided for. And again, this is another lesson for you young guys. Don't start jumping into serious relationships before you get your first job. Remember, you need to be able to support your spouse before you go looking for one. And that may sound a little old-fashioned, but it's biblical. And for the rest of this chapter, and for most of the book, the bride and the groom use these figures of speech to complement each other. And some of them will probably be lost on you as you read through them. But if you decide to study this, I encourage you to get a good commentary. Here's an example of a verse in verse 14. We're still in chapter 1 here. My beloved is to me as a cluster of campfire in the vineyards of En-Gedi. Now this, to a normal person, wouldn't mean anything, like we don't know what campfire is or what En-Gedi is. But En-Gedi, if you look into it, was the largest oasis along the western shore of the Dead Sea and was famed for its aromatic shrubs. But the whole idea of your beloved being a pleasantly fragrant plant on an oasis surrounded by a desert is lost on you if you don't understand what this location is. Okay? But the bigger point I want to make is that the groom didn't mind if his bride met the social standards of beauty. Maybe her neck is really long, like he describes later, like an ivory tower, or maybe her nose is like the Tower of Lebanon. You know, it didn't matter to him. He still found beauty in her. And what about the groom meeting the world standard? There's a point later in the song where the bride is looking for her groom, and her friends ask, what's so special about this guy? You know, maybe this was just an opportunity for the bride to start speaking about how handsome he was. Or maybe it's an indication that he didn't meet all the standards of beauty either. But none of this kept them from complimenting each other. So here's an important application to take away from this. Regardless of how long you've been with your spouse, you should set them as your standard of beauty. If you are new to this concept, you may have to admit to yourself that this could take a little time. Men and women are both bombarded today with different standards of beauty for each gender. And instead of letting the world decide, you should look at your spouse and condition yourself to think, this is my standard of beauty. And if you can do that, you'll find it much easier to have a relationship like the one here between the bride and the groom in Song of Solomon. That doesn't mean that you can't help your spouse grow in character or improve their health. But that does mean you shouldn't try to get your spouse to conform to a worldly standard because you've allowed yourself to be conditioned that way for so long. So for example, right now my standard of beauty is brunette hair and brown eyes and all the other things bundled up in my wife. And as we age, that standard is probably going to change. So hair color, maybe? The bride and groom continue to talk about each other's beauty through their courtship and even after their marriage later in the song. In Song of Solomon 4:7, the groom basically tells her, you are perfect. He says, thou art fair, my love, there is no spot in thee. But not everything about the relationship was perfect. And we're going to take a look at this in Song of Solomon 5:2. We're going to skip ahead and see how they dealt with a problem in their relationship. This is the bride speaking here. Song of Solomon 5:2. I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled. For my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of night. Okay, so it's late at night, and he wants to come in and go to bed, or visit at least. But at this point, she makes excuses for why she can't get up and let him in. And those excuses, as we're going to see here, sound a bit silly for someone who's so passionate about her beloved. She says, I've put off my coat. How shall I put it on? I have washed my feet. How shall I defile them? Can you think of times in your relationship where your spouse has asked you to do something, even something simple like unlocking a door, and you've tried to make up every excuse that you can think of why you should not have to help them? Later on, she regrets not helping him, and when she finally goes to the door, he was gone. Verse 6, I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spake. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. So she goes out into the night looking for him. She asks her friends for help because she needs to find him and make this right. But not once through the whole thing does she speak badly about him. The whole time she's describing to her friends all his handsome features and expressing how much she loves him. And in chapter 6, she finally does meet up with her groom, and he gives her a proper scolding. Chapter 6, verse 4. Thou art beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. Turn away thine eyes from me, for they have overcome me. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear in Gilead. And then he goes on and on. But he doesn't scold her at all. He just starts talking about how beautiful she is. When is the last time you have felt slighted by your spouse and your first response was to tell them how beautiful they were? And in this, I think there's another powerful lesson here about forgiveness. Forgive quickly, especially the petty stuff. And with this, I've posted Ephesians 4:31 and 32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Notice here how it almost looks like a progression. If you're unwilling to forgive, you start harboring bitterness. That ends up turning into wrath and anger, eventually leading to malice, where you start intentionally doing bad stuff to each other. And when this gets out of control, couples out in the world eventually turn to divorce. But instead, in verse 32, be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as Yahweh, for Messiah's sake, hath forgiven you. I want to go back and point something else the bride says before she meets up with the groom. This is right before the groom starts praising her beauty. She says, I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. This is probably one of the most popular phrases from this song. This is also something she said earlier in their courtship back in chapter 2, and then here again in chapter 6 as they're dealing with a problem in their relationship. And by saying it in this context, it's as though she knows everything's going to be okay once they're together again. She doesn't have to fear his wrath because she knows that he loves her. They come together and support each other and understand that they need to be servants to each other. You know, if your spouse needs you to get out of bed and unlock the door or whatever that task is, you put their needs first and you take care of them. Philippians 2:3 provides a supporting view of what we find here in the Song of Solomon. This is an example of a Messianic attitude, and it applies to more than just our marriage. Philippians 2:3, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. When this attitude of a servant goes missing from one of the spouses in the marriage, or both of the spouses, then I believe that marriage is going to have issues. As I wrap this up, I want to share a slide I created based on some commentary that I heard from a conservative Christian pastor regarding the Song of Solomon. He said there are 3 types of marriages, and they're summarized in this slide. The first type of marriage is where you have 2 selfish spouses who are unwilling to serve each other. That's going to result in a terrible marriage. The second type is where you have one spouse that's a servant and displays that attitude, and then the other spouse that's selfish. And he classified this as an abusive marriage because one spouse is often going to take advantage of the other. And finally, the third marriage is the one that Yahweh intended, where both spouses are serving each other. And so we consider this a righteous marriage. I'll leave this up for you to think about. So our last application for today is simply to be a servant to your spouse. It's a simple thing to say, but a much harder thing to put into practice if you're not used to being a servant. And this is an ongoing theme that I see as I read through this psalm. And I feel it's probably the most important concept to take away. We did skip over a lot of good content in this book, and if you plan to study this, and you have a spouse, you really need to study it together. But for now, I'll leave you with another familiar verse from this song. Song of Solomon 8:7. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. Thank you for your attention, and may Yahweh bless you as you grow in love. Hallelujah.
Thank you for watching today's teaching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay up to date with all our latest releases. To stay connected to this ministry, download our mobile app. It's available in the App Store for Apple or Android. Simply search Yahweh's Restoration Ministry. Visit our extensive website at yrm.org. We have hundreds of teachings for men and women alike, and new articles added every week. Join our growing online congregation and watch us live every Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Central Time by visiting yrm.org/live or following the live worship link on our mobile app. See below in the description on this video for many of the other ways to connect with us. Blessings and shalom.